What we like to call the Pineapple Express continues to take dead-on aim right at the Pacific Northwest.
I know those who live along the river are watching those levels very carefully.
We have some fairly heavy rains actually showing up on radar.
We are right at the 26th level now, so it has risen about an inch or so.
I never imagined this. It's just wild.
30 years ago, the area I stand today was under feet of floodwater. An atmospheric river combined with melting snow was the cause of the Great Flood of 1996. It caused millions of dollars worth of damage, and 8 people lost their lives during the multi-day event. During this KOIN Plus special, we'll talk with KOIN 6 meteorologist Steve Pierce to get a better idea of what the weather setup was like in February of '96. Former KOIN 6 news anchor Jeff Gianola recalls what it was like reporting on this historic event. And I also talk with past emergency management and today's flood safety district on what to expect if we see another flood like the one 30 years ago. Of course, we had to bring in our very own meteorologist, Steve Pierce. Steve, thanks for joining us. And talk to me. You were living in the area during this big 30 anniversary now event.
I can't believe it's already been 30 years, Josh.
Yeah.
My memory goes back to exactly how the pattern's set up. We had classic Arctic blast, cold wind coming down the gorge, continental air from Canada, very, very typical. But this Arctic blast was pretty significant. We had high temperatures for 5 to 7 days of about 25 degrees. The coldest high was 23, I think, during that event. Lows in the teens. Even starting to get a few ice chunks even in the Columbia River near Vancouver at the Interstate 5 bridge, and that's rare. You know it's cold when we get that. And then we started to see the classic, we called it Pineapple Express back then, of course, atmospheric river. I still like to use both of those terms.
It's fun.
They're interchangeable. We saw one developing, and we knew it was going to be significant.
Yeah.
And it turned out, on that 1 to 5 scale they use nowadays, which they didn't back then, certainly would have been a 5. We went from 25 degrees, about 6 to 8 inches of snow on the ground in Portland, and that's an important part of this story. Lots of snowpack in the mountains. Then we had a Pineapple Express atmospheric river. We jumped from 25 to almost 60 degrees in a matter of about 12 to 18 hours. And then it rained 7 inches, nearly 7 inches, in Northwest Oregon, Southwest Washington, the greater Portland area, over the next 72 hours. So that's about 2 inches per day for 3 straight days, or a little more than that actually. And the big key was the freezing level shot up to about 9,000 feet. And all that snow in the mountains, up to about 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 feet, we're gonna have huge runoff. Rapid melt, warm, that's the worst thing. Warm rain on top of big snowpack, it's gonna turn to mush. We knew we had about 24 to 48 hours to get ready as all that spilled down into the main basins like the Willamette where we're at now, the Columbia, the East Fork and North Fork of the Lewis River up in Clark and Cowlitz County, Clackamas, Sandy River, every basin in Northwest Oregon, Southwest Washington, just bursting at the seams.
And I know a lot of people were kind of referring to the atmospheric rivers that we saw at the end of 2025, comparing how it was to the 96 flood, but different scenario because of that snow.
Yeah, there really is no comparison. I mean, they called it a 100-year flood in 1996. We know we had one, I believe it was December 1964, that winter. Some of the old timers probably remember that one.
Yeah.
Equally as close, again, Arctic blast, snow on the ground in Portland, that's the key. A lot of low elevation snow, followed by a rapid warm up with rain on top of it. That's what sets the stage. Now, it's been 30 years, in February. Could we have another one? I'm sure we will. Maybe worse than that, maybe less than that. We were sure, as sure as we could be, that water was gonna spill into downtown Portland. Hence, they put up a huge man-made wall, a wooden wall with jersey barriers pushed against the wood.
In an area that we're standing in right now.
Right now, yeah. So it came up above, about another 5 feet. They did really good at forecasting the river levels. The Army Corps of Engineers did a great job. And then as the event got closer, and the rivers are rising, we realized it probably wasn't going to breach the wall. I believe it was about 12 inches shy of the bottom. The bottom of the ground, or top of the wall. So we didn't need that barrier. But vivid memories. President Clinton came out, actually after the federal declaration, I believe, for emergency services, a disaster area, I guess you could call it. Oregon City, or downtown Oregon City, there's video of downtown Oregon City. People are in boats, stop signs are halfway covered. That's 8 feet, maybe 10 feet. Yeah, the locks down there above the Willamette River, the falls up above Oregon City were just raging. Kind of reminded me of what we saw at Snoqualmie Falls, I think it was this past
back
December and January, early January. It was really significant. And there are still, up where I live in Salmon Creek, there's a picture I have of the flood of '96, the high water mark on a tree on my favorite running trail, the Salmon Creek Trail. And I'm shocked to see how high up it is. Yeah. And when I run by it every day, I think, wow, it was that high?
Completely underwater.
Completely underwater. In fact, Salmon Creek, the creek itself, in that area of Vancouver, north side of Vancouver, it altered the path of the creek, and it's still in that position
new area
today. Yeah.
That is incredible. And I know, I almost feel like you're the historian of all things weather. We ask you a stat and you're able to spit it out.
Yes.
How does this compare to any other natural disasters the Pacific Northwest has seen, at least in many of our lifetimes?
Yeah, Mount St. Helens was pretty big.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's number one.
Yeah.
Totally different type of event. Columbus Day storm, overall damage, probably if you were to put it in dollars today, 2026, Columbus Day storm, hands down, October 12th, 1962. I mean, the Morrison Bridge behind me down a ways. Yeah. I think it was 106 mile an hour gust on the Morrison Bridge. Corvallis up above 130 miles an hour. Yeah, big windstorm.
Let's talk about the visualizations for here, downtown Portland. Yeah. What did that look like? Did you even come down here, or was it like not an area you could travel to?
Everybody was coming to downtown Portland. Not only was downtown Portland really the hub of all the nightlife in the 90s in Portland, and the urban sprawl hadn't really kicked in the, Beaverton, Hillsborough, Vancouver yet. So everybody was coming down here. This was a major national news story.
How long did it take after the skies kind of opened up? Was it a slow process? Because I know this wasn't just one day impacting. It was about a week or so.
It lasted for about 5 to 7 days before the river started to slowly recede. But then you have the cleanup side of it. Mud thick in people's homes, their basements. Most of downtown Oregon City still sitting under feet of water. That took a long time. And then the areas where it doesn't drain very well, new little lakes that formed right in the middle of the street. And that finally, of course, subsided. And, Department of Public Works for all the local municipalities could get out there and clean it up and clean out the storm drains and the sewer systems. But it was, it's unlike any, again, outside of Mount St. Helens, that was a big one. And of course, the folks that are around to remember it, the Columbus Day storm in 1962.
And this was so impactful for not just Portland, pretty much the entire Pacific Northwest. We're remembering it now, but people can still continue this conversation with the American Meteorological Society. Tell me a little bit about that.
The AMS is hosting, that's American Meteorological Society, the Oregon chapter, is hosting a public meeting at OMSI, right across the river over here, on the February 23rd at 6 p.m. That's open to the general public. Come down there to the planetarium. We're going to have a great presentation. I believe it holds about 350, 400 people in there. And we're going to have some meteorologists that give a great presentation and a recap of this very event, a lot of the meteorological factors that I just discussed.
Thanks again to KOIN 6 meteorologist Steve Pierce. Coming up, I sit down with Jeff Gianola as he recalls what it was like reporting during such an impactful natural disaster right here in the Pacific Northwest.
Local merchants and volunteers all day have been placing sandbags in front of shops and restaurants as far up, as I said, as 3rd Avenue. Several places closed early this afternoon, but before they left, the owners placed merchandise and equipment onto desks and shelves. The owners of a popular bakery say they're worried about losing ingredients.
No flood insurance? Who would ever think that you'd need flood insurance? I wouldn't. Most business owners don't have it, and I never imagined this. It's just wild.
Meantime, Front Avenue and side streets connecting Front Avenue are closed while emergency crews wait and watch the waters rise.
30 years later, now retired Jeff Gianola recalls the events that unfolded during the flood of '96. Of course, we had to bring in the great Jeff Gianola. Jeff, thanks for coming out of retirement to talk about this historic event. 30 years now since the '96 flood.
You know, it is so etched in my memory, and anyone that went through that '96 flood who was living here at the time will never forget it. I have never seen anything like that. I was at Channel 2 at the time, and that rain started falling on February 5th of 1996. And Josh, I gotta tell you, I've seen downpours, but this left a pit in my stomach when I saw this, when I was driving to work. And I remember it was coming down so hard and not stopping that it was almost yellow-brown in the air, and the river was running muddy. And I remember thinking, there's gonna be flooding, and then I realized there's a huge snowpack, and this is warm rain. And sure enough, that rain did not let up for the next 5 days. I mean, it just never let up, and it just came down with that same intensity. I remember specifically, it seems like we were on the air for 2 weeks straight. I remember sleeping at the station. We were constantly on, we interrupted program. We were on 24/7, giving really valuable information. People who had to evacuate. And, it wasn't just Portland. We had where the five rivers come together on the coast near Tillamook. There's massive flooding on the coast, massive flooding in the valley. So we were all over the place reporting on it. But I remember one specific event where a dock broke off, a restaurant dock and terrace in Lake Oswego. Well, the Willamette flows north. And so I said on the air, within the next 15 minutes, we should see that dock floating in downtown Portland. And sure enough, it came roaring through town intact like a giant raft, then hit the abutment on the Burnside Bridge and just exploded. And the amount of debris that was piled up along the bridge abutments in Portland was incredible. It took months for them to clear all that out, even after, the floodwaters receded.
And kind of the visualization, seeing some of the images of the water coming so deep into Portland, so many the communities, what was it like to report on sites like that?
By the 8th of February, the water was cresting almost to the top deck of the Hawthorne Bridge over here. And so obviously almost to the top of the seawall. The mayor at the time, Vera Katz, called on city workers and volunteers to come right down here, and hundreds of people showed up. I mean, guys with their tool chests and saws, and they put a plywood barrier covered with plastic and sandbags from the Hawthorne Bridge almost a mile down to the steel bridge to prevent any water from flooding into downtown. And luckily, by the next day, things stabilized, and so that wall was never tested to its full capability. But at the time, I was working at Channel 2, and KOIN, our studios, while they're in the KOIN building, are down below. And so there was a real threat from our friends at KOIN at the time. They had plans to evacuate, and I know they were in conversation with us on the other side of the river at Channel 2 about staying on the air, and we offered help. I mean, if you think about it, sometimes disasters like that do bring people together. There's so many stories of people being rescued by neighbors, and that was a deadly storm. And the fact that there were hundreds of people down here who, almost like a barn raising, came together to save their city. And that's a moment in time that, when you look at it, there was a disaster, but it also really tested the mettle of the city and the people here. There was
an extra sense of community.
An extra sense of community. People coming together and saying, we're gonna join together and fight this. And it was really something to see. The other thing is, this wasn't unique. We've had a history of floods on the Willamette. If you go back in history and you look in 1964, Portland was on the cover of Life magazine. The Willamette was flooded, Salem was flooded. So chances are, I don't know when, we will have another flood someday. And it's funny how our memories kind of forget. And then we have a flood and we think, oh my gosh, it's
never happened before.
We've been through this before,
and it's hard to believe that it's already been 30 years? Because I feel like the 96 flood is so ingrained in Portland's community. I know when I first moved here, that was the first thing people were telling me about is, oh man, the 96 flood was something to remember. And we forget how quick time goes by.
What was amazing was the amount of rain falling, but how warm it was outside. And I know the dam system, you know, along the Willamette, the dam keepers or whatever, there was a great story about the guy that arrived on the morning of February 5th and hearing a dripping and realizing there was massive snow melt going on. And man, they started opening all the flood release stuff on the dams. They knew what was coming, and it just couldn't be stopped, you know. Remember, there were power outages.
Yeah.
There were power outages, but I was at the station for almost 2 weeks. I didn't go home. I mean, we were in shifts on the air. We didn't stop. I mean, you know, things were happening, and it seems like something would get under control, and all of a sudden one neighborhood, especially on the east side over on that side, would be inundated with water. And it was like, okay, we would give, you know, the latest evacuation orders and what was happening, but people were just glued to the television sets. Now, there was the internet then, but not social media like there is now. So that was a main source of information, was television at that time. And so, you know, that's where local journalism shines when there's a disaster like that, because you're giving information, you're calming nerves, you're letting people know, you know, where they can get help.
What was the takeaway on your career to be able to report on something so memorable for people?
Oh, I think it's one of the, if I look back on my career, it's one of the more memorable moments. You know, you get into journalism because in a lot of ways you want to spotlight things, you want to help people. Well, there's no other story that really makes an impact on people than a natural disaster. And if you can be the person they turn to say, here's where you can get help, you know, here's the information you need to stay safe, you know, here's the latest weather coming in, you know, it really, I think it's really a memorable moment in my career. That I felt the profession that I chose did a good job. And I felt proud of that.
Always great to get to catch up with the one and only Jeff Gianola. Coming up, I sit down with then Emergency Manager Les Miller when this KOIN Plus special returns.
Let's go to Sandy James, who is standing by at the seawall watching the water rise. Sandy? Hi, just follow the action there, Art. Yep, you can see this is what's happening. This is the busiest part of the evening so far. We've got these equipment trucks bringing in those concrete barriers that I was telling you about earlier. They're starting down at Salmon Spring. They're putting them perpendicularly up against the wall, and they're going to do that clear down to the Burnside and beyond. So there is a lot of that activity going on right now. Let's take a look at the water line. Here we go again. I feel like I'm at a fundraiser. Let's take a look at how much the tote board is showing tonight. But actually, we are right at the 26th level now, so it has risen about an inch or so. Still, I do believe it's slowing down. It's not rising as fast as it has earlier today. I wanted to show you something over here. If you get a little bit better perspective as to how high this wall is that they built. Let's take a look on down over the wall. Now you can see right below me there where the sandbags are. That is the sea wall. That's about at the 28-foot level. And so this plywood reinforcement, if you will, with the 2x4s, that adds about another 4 feet. So we're talking about 32 feet here before the water would start coming over. And hopefully that's just not going to happen. Also, the last time we talked, they had not actually raised the Hawthorne Bridge. But as we look down that way now, we can see, excuse me, sir, we can see that, yes, in fact, they have raised the Hawthorne. So now we've got the Hawthorne and Burnside bridges up, no traffic going across. And as you mentioned just a little bit ago, Front Avenue downtown is closed. So that's pretty much about the latest from here. You know, if all this activity weren't going on because there was imminent danger, it'd be kind of neat out here because it's really beautiful. All the evening lights, obviously, and there's some hustle and bustle and people are still down here all willing to help out, so it's really kind of a nice night too, and I just hope everything ends up being not nearly as bad as they think in this area. At least I know there's been some other areas that have really had some terrible devastation, so we can hope that things stay down here.
From 88 to 08, Les Miller was Oregon and Southwest Washington's emergency manager. Here's what he remembers about the flood of '96. Now I'd like to bring in Les Miller. Les, thank you so much for taking the time to kind of go down memory lane with us and discuss what were you doing during the 1996 flood here in Portland and really across the Pacific Northwest?
Well, you know, it's a great question, Josh. The February of 1996 flood looked like it was going to leave Oregon alone. So I actually, that Monday of that week, I had gone up to Seattle to participate in a state of Washington meeting. And when I get up there, the district's emergency operations center manager called and said, "Get your butt down here. This event has shifted south and it's going to hit us hard." And so I got in the car and I headed back home. And sure enough, Carol Hudson was her name, and she had ramped up the emergency operations center and made all the contacts to get the commander and all the lead staff to understand that we were going to be in for a real ride. And that's what started us off. We started immediately 24 hours a day monitoring that event because, again, we had multiple reasons for it. First, all of our projects are flood control projects, and they needed to be operated according to the flood control schedules and protocols and everything. And we were also the lead district for any kind of emergency operations done under Public Law 8499, where the Corps of Engineers has incredible authority to augment state and local authorities in their flood fight efforts. So we were on the dime right away to make sure that we were going to carry out our part of whatever activities were going on.
And what do you think was the most memorable moment throughout that event? Because it was a multi-day event. What really kind of stood out to you and your team?
You know, I think probably the incredible communication between our district and all of the news media outlets. We were working with them day and night to make sure that the information that we had was the same thing that they had. And if they heard anything out in the local communities that would help us be more responsive, we wanted to know about it. And it was great. In fact, even the building of the wall there in the picture, that was actually a design thought that had occurred earlier in 1995 with the city of Portland. Should we actually get to that kind of event? And it was funny how they had already stockpiled a bunch of the Jersey barriers and a lot of the plastic. So when it came time, the community just volunteered and they moved all those things in place and put that wall in. Thankfully, it wasn't necessary, but it was there should it be.
What do you think were some of the big takeaways after seeing how everybody jumped into action? What type of steps did you and your team do after the event to learn from the devastation that you saw?
It's a really great question because there were things that occurred that we, quite frankly, didn't foresee, but we were able to respond to. For example, the Salem water intake structure had been eroded away because of the high water, and we were able to go in there and provide contract support of rock and placement to keep that water line from being completely destroyed. Another, again, because of our authorities, it allowed us to help them, but it wasn't one of those kind of things that we had really foreseen. The efforts that we thought we'd be participating in other words, building temporary flood walls and levees and stuff like that, that just never materialized because the local communities just had underestimated the number of volunteer hours required to make that work. We had lots of supplies, we had lots of engineering and technical assistance to provide to them, but the amount of labor it takes to build a wall with sandbags was very much underestimated. So many of those just never got built.
Looking into the crystal ball, we almost feel that this type of event is inevitable with how the climate is rapidly changing. How do you think the city would respond in the events that this happen in the near future?
Boy, Josh, that is a great question. So much of it, seriously, is about the amount of forewarning we get. And the thing that's so dicey about where we are with our wonderful dynamics coming off the coast range, and then that hitting the valley, and then the dynamics when it hits the Cascades, is just really being agile, being able to take that change in direction of where that storm goes, where it stagnates, where it literally just decides to just dump the largest amount of water, and be able to pivot there. Again, one of the great assets the state of Oregon has is the Oregon National Guard. And in the past, they were just Johnny on the spot. Where they are these days, I really don't know, because they are just a huge source of resources. The other thing that's different now also is that there are a lot more churches and nonprofit organizations that were willing to volunteer the labor back then. And I don't know how prepared and coordinated they are these days to be able to provide that labor. So again, a lot of it depends on really where your resources are and where that high water rises fastest.
Yeah, a lot of different scenarios, and the way we even communicate amongst each other now is so much different than it was 30 years ago. Hard to believe it was 30 years ago. Would you maybe say that this was one of the most impactful events of your career?
Boy, here's probably one of the biggest reasons for me was our youngest was born the day we closed the EOC there, the Portland district.
So, yeah, definitely cemented in your memory.
Yeah, my wife and I, we have 5 incredible kids, and she had her hands full because as the chief cook and bottle wash in the family, being in that EOC 12, 18 hours a day, it really put her in a pinch. But neighbors and church friends and everything came to help out, and it worked out really great. Again, I think more than anything else was seeing how many community members came together to help out their communities. The little town of Tualatin just really got in, and River Grove and the Lake Oswego area, those communities, you really saw them bond together and really make a difference, whether it was trying to put up barriers, but in many cases, it was just helping folks evacuate and get to higher ground. And so that was a big deal about that. And again, it's nice to see people come together, but it's a crazy environment to try to do it in.
It definitely is, and I feel like disasters like this really kind of help bring in the human aspect and the good that can be found with everyone coming together and helping each other out.
I totally agree, and again, you and all the other stations, your meteorologists are such a key factor, because while the National Weather Service, NOAA, and all of their river forecasting centers and all that kind of stuff is working with the Corps of Engineers and stuff, it's you all that the public listens to. And so the more in touch they are with you and you with them, it's really what makes the difference. And we fortunately have not had a significant test of our flood response systems in the Northwest for a while, which makes it just kind of interesting that this year we're really dealing with some very serious drought conditions up there with snowpack.
Definitely so. In a shortfall 30 years later, hard to believe that the sites that we were seeing back in 1996 in 2026, we would be seeing the complete opposite. But we all know that can change so fast here in the Pacific Northwest, and
Oh,
sites
yeah.
like this could maybe crop up again next year. Hopefully not, but we all need to stay prepared. What's kind of been your motto in preparing the public? What type of things should they be practicing?
You know, it's interesting. Most folks don't really stop and think about that they actually have a preparedness culture. It's called getting ready to go to work. It's called getting the kids out of the house. It's called getting ready to go on vacation. If they can take that particular mindset of being prepared and taking it one step further and say, you know, if we couldn't do our normal things, how well would we be able to just hold down the fort, be confident, and be comfortable? Human beings function so much better if they're comfortable. So that, again, in their vehicles, always having something in their vehicle that will keep them warm, will keep them hydrated, will keep them fed for a short period of time. And maybe even more important is having enough painkiller, a bottle of the most effective painkiller in the car, because if you can get rid of the pain, you'll sleep. And if you don't sleep, you are pretty dang rummy. So real important that people really think about how they function and make sure that they have enough with them, especially to take care of them in that first 24 or 48 hours. And the funny part about it is those wonderful young families that have kiddos, especially ones that are using diaper bags, hands off to you, mom and dad, because those are some of the best preparedness thoughts to carry on with your kids as they get older, and include the kids in that preparedness effort. We certainly did, and each one of the kids had their own little plastic container in our vehicle that carried the things that they wanted to keep them comfortable.
Great advice to remember there from Les Miller. Coming up, I sit down with today's Director of Planning and Public Affairs at the Flood Safety District as they share how we're now prepared for the next flood.
Our reporter Lisa Balick began this day over on the Oregon coast, flying over flooded plains. Right now she's in downtown Portland, I believe, watching the evacuation. Lisa?
Mike, actually, we were just there, and we just sent you back some tape, and you were just talking about how people had really sandbagged. Now we've moved up actually by the Columbia River. We're off Marine Drive. These here are houseboats, and take a look at this. A lot of people out here have already evacuated this area. Take a look at this ramp. This is the ramp how these folks get home at night, and obviously no way to get over there. There is one railway back over there where they can staircase go across okay, but most of these folks, we understand, have left because it's tough going and the water is coming up very, very quickly. Again, this is on the Columbia River. These are houseboats here. And the water is coming up on these folks here. Some folks are staying, and they've told us that they plan to stay for the duration no matter what happens. They want to keep an eye on their belongings, but others have packed up and left. This is the situation right here tonight on the Columbia River just off Marine Drive. Mike?
Thank you, Lisa. Thanks for that update there.
I now want to go ahead and bring in the Urban Flood Safety and Water Quality District's Planning and Public Affairs Director, Colin Rowan. Colin, thank you so much for joining us today. And you know, it's hard to believe that it's been 30 years since the Pacific Northwest felt this impactful flood. What are you and your team actively doing to maybe prevent another event like this from happening? And what did you learn from the 96 flood?
Thanks, Josh. Thanks for having us here today. Well, in 1996, it was the last major flood that our system experienced. It was a more than 100-year flood. There was a pretty familiar set of circumstances where there was a high snowpack. There was extended periods of rain earlier in the winter, and so the rivers were full. And then quickly, things warmed up. Early February, 60 degrees. So it sounds a lot like what was happening over the last month in January, where it was warmer than usual. And then a lot of rain came. And so you had what they call rain on snow, and the rivers swelled up very quickly. The rivers along our levee system reached about 30 feet of elevation. Just for that is normally right around 14 feet during that time of year, so significantly higher, a lot of flow. So what happened to our system? The Army Corps of Engineers said that, this we really had sort of a near miss. They stopped river traffic along the Columbia River so that what's called the wave wash wouldn't break the levee system. They also came in and had to do reinforcements along a railroad embankment that's on the far western side of our system. That railroad embankment was later reinforced, but it needs to be completely reconstructed. And it's something that we're working on today. So in 2024, the voters approved a bond package that gave us the ability to make substantial improvements to our levee system. Our levee system is over 100 years old. It has signs of age. It's been really well maintained. Our district has done a really good job of operating and maintaining it, but it needs substantial improvements. And that's what we're doing today. We know that the similar scenario, that 1996 flood, with climate change, we are having more rain on snow events, and that's our greatest risk. So we are approaching our improvements to address those issues. We're making a uniform level of protection along the system so there's no low spots. We're reinforcing some of the places that we know are more fragile or easier to break. And we're really being prepared for the next 100 years and potential floods that might be coming down the river.
Unfortunately, it does seem like events like this across the country are becoming more frequent, and these 100-year events are happening maybe now becoming 50-year events. So it's good to see that we've kind of learned from what has happened in the past to prepare for potentially what's in the future. If an event were to happen like this, say, next year, what now would you tell people to prepare for?
I think what's really important is just to look at what is happening around us right now. In December, there was an atmospheric river that was forecasted to come across our region and deliver an immense amount of rain. It tracked more northernly. And so if you take a look at what happened in Washington, there were major floods, there were levee failures, and that's really what we're working every day to help prevent. So my recommendation for our region is to keep on making the investments in this flood safety improvements that are needed. We are working hard to get those built so that our system remains resilient and functional as these events become more frequent.
We are, as a human race, trying to tame Mother Nature. Rivers, they've been here far before we ever stepped foot here in the Pacific Northwest. What do you think is the biggest challenge in trying to keep these rivers in place of what humans have built around? What are some of the challenges that you and your team have to overcome to keep our structures safe that we've built?
It's really important to remember that flooding is the leading cause of damage from natural disasters. So as we're looking at all of the different natural disasters that are out there, when you're looking at earthquakes and wildfire, they're all part of the multi-hazard preparation that we need to do. But we are really strongly advocating for people to be aware that flooding does happen, that flooding is the most common form of natural disaster. So that awareness is really important. And knowing just how powerful floods are and how much damage can happen, we have real lived experience. In 1948, there was a failure of our levee system that led to the destruction of the city of Vanport. There were 18,000 people that lost their homes, 15 people died, and it flooded a substantial part of the system that we manage today. So we work every day to make sure that type of disaster doesn't happen, and we want people to be aware that we're working to prevent that from happening.
And what is the best way, if an event were to happen like this again in the future, what is your kind of line of command? Who do you report to get that information out to the public that in the event that, say, a dam breaks or a levee isn't holding? What's kind of that process look like to get that information to individuals at home?
That's a good question, Josh. We are very fortunate in the Portland-Vancouver area to have some great emergency management organizations. Our agency does emergency management, but we're part of a regional disaster preparedness organization. And so Multnomah County and the cities all participate in that throughout Multnomah County. And so they are able to do reverse 911 calls and able to let people know that if they need to evacuate, the responsible agency is through either the cities or through the county for unincorporated Multnomah County.
And then, of course, they trickle down into our newsroom, and we do our best to spread the word as well. And I think just kind of looking down the line, all of us hope that an event like 96 never happens again, but we need to prepare for that potential. So we are keeping our fingers crossed that something like this does not happen, but we know we are in good hands with you all as well.
Thanks. Yeah, and I think it is worth noting that events like that will happen again, and with more frequent rain on snow events, it is more likely to happen in the coming years, and that's why we're really making the improvements to our levee system to make sure that our region remains safe. And behind our levees, there are more than 8,000 people that live there. There's also 60,000 people that have jobs there at 2,500 businesses. So it is a economic engine for our whole region. So it's really important to keep it safe.
Thanks again to Colin Rowan and the Flood Safety District. 30 years later, and the Pacific Northwest still remembers this historic flood vividly. Now is the time to prepare for another historic natural disaster that may be heading our way. It's not a matter of if, but a matter of when. Reporting for KOIN 6 News, I'm Chief Meteorologist Josh Cozart. Thanks for watching.